I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. This edition of Parallax Views is brought to you by the $10 and above tier supporters of Parallax Views on Patreon. So, with that in mind, producers credit shoutouts to Gunnar, Mark, Alexander, Catherine, Tilo, Emilia, Jeff, John, Bert, Brian, Elliot, Michael, Brace, James, Nick, Mersham, Galen, Arlen, Bo, Christopher, Michael, Gigadelic Media, Chance, Chase, Dan, Big Bob, David H., Y. Kellerman, Saaded 13, Kathleen, David, Ava, Bob, The West Bank Robbery Podcast, Jamie, Enoch, Gary, Max, Ishtofer, James, Martin, Matthew Ho, Brian, Nobody, Thomas, and Dano. And now on to the show. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. On this edition of the program, well, first, I should open by saying, please support me on Patreon. Patreon.com/ParallaxViews. One more time, that's Patreon.com/ParallaxViews. I don't have an advertiser right now. I really need your support. I've noticed that putting this advertisement of sorts, self-advertisement for the Patreon at the beginning of the show has gotten me a few more subscribers, and I want to thank those who are subscribing to the Patreon. Should have a new C. Derek Varn episode out. Sorry, a little bit tongue-tied today. New episode of the Varn Vlog with C. Derek Varn and I discussing current events out shortly here. That'll definitely be out before the weekend. And, of course, I need the Patreon support to keep this show going. I'm trying to produce a lot more as we head into election season, and I have a few episodes on the back burner, so even if I'm not able to record as much, there will be, a steady stream of episodes coming out in the following days, weeks, and months. So if you want to see this show keep going, I really do need that support. Patreon.com/ParallaxViews. Now with that out of the way, I was a little bit tongue-tied for a few times in that self-advert, but it happens, I guess. In any case, I'm going to leave this in here, and we'll move on to introducing our guest, who is going to be Ben Burgis, a returning guest and friend of the show, a columnist for Jacobin, and host of the Give Them an Argument YouTube show. He's a man of the left. He, of course, wrote the book, Give Them an Argument, about how to debate the right as a democratic socialist or left-wing voice. And we're going to be talking about an article he wrote back in 2022 for the Daily Beast entitled J.D. Vance's Unbelievably Phony Populism. And I thought it would be a good time to revisit that, seeing as J.D. Vance of Hillbilly Elegy fame was recently announced as Donald Trump's running mate on the Republican ticket. So, we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the Republican National Convention, the speech given by the Teamsters' Sean O'Brien at that convention, Democratic Party messaging, and where the Democrats should be headed from here now that Joe Biden has dropped out and Kamala Harris appears to be the Democratic Party leader that will be taking on Trump in this presidential election. All that and much more in the following conversation with Ben Burgis. Let's get right to it. Welcome back to Parallax Views, a guest that I haven't had on in a while, and I regret that because he's always got a great conversation when I've had him on. Ben Burgis, host of the Give Them an Argument show, writes at Jacobin, has also written at the Daily Beast, and does the philosophy for the People Substack. How you doing, Ben?
I'm good, thank
Did I
you.
miss anything there? Anything else you're working on?
Uh, I mean, Jacobin and the show are the main things. I have I guess last week during the RNC, I did officially complete my process of selling out by getting an article at msnbc.com.
I didn't see that. What did you write about for MSNBC?
Yeah, I wrote about the basically the claim that was made by a bunch of speakers at the RNC that Joe Biden opened the border. That was like probably almost every speaker used the phrase open borders to describe Biden's immigration policies. And most of them made the connection between that and the opioid epidemic and, people dying of fentanyl overdoses. And so the point of the article was actually Biden has not opened the borders. In fact, he's been terrible on immigration. He's
Been
just
more
been
a
quite,
continuation of a lot of Trump policies.
yeah, exactly. He's been very Trumpian lately. Uh, like you would not be able to sort of make sense of this if you were getting your version of reality from the RNC speakers, but Biden is actually being sued right now by the ACLU and a bunch of immigrants' rights groups for basically, moves he made through executive orders to sort of severely limit, the rights of asylum seekers. Um, and so the premise that the borders open is really wild. I mean, like this is again, there's quite a bit of continuity there between Trump and Biden on the border. And the idea that this is why, so many Americans are dying of fentanyl overdoses is also crazy because one, fentanyl is judging, at least by where, like the numbers on where, seizures happen, uh, like the overwhelming majority of people who are caught smuggling fentanyl are American citizens. And the overwhelming majority of seizures happen, at the like internally or at legal ports of entry, uh, which also makes sense because you're a lot less likely to get busted if you're an American citizen, entering, legal point of entry. And so it just like it's this idea that like undocumented immigrants are like, scaling the border fence, with bags of fentanyl, is just not reality. And it, in particular, I think the whole discussion really misses the boat. It's like, yes, it is. There is like this is a huge social problem. Lots of people do die of fentanyl overdoses. Somebody I care about died of fentanyl overdose a few years ago, but it really could not have less to do with the border and all that stuff. And really, what it's these are deaths of despair, right? I mean, there's a reason that this crisis has been so concentrated in these kind of post-industrialized Rust Belt areas. And if you actually wanted to do something about it, then just like sort of escalating the cruelty against immigrants isn't going to do it. You'd have to actually, you'd actually have to move towards a more economically equal society, to do something about the underlying despair.
That's one of the big things that I've been thinking about a lot lately. This is with regards to Democratic messaging. A lot of Democrats are talking more and more about um, Project 2025, the
Mm-hmm.
Heritage Foundation sort of agenda list that they have for when Trump gets into office. And then Trump has, I think, Agenda 47, which is similar, but he's tried to distance himself from Project 2025. But what I find interesting is if you read Project 2025, and I know Sarab Amari, who I don't always agree with,
Yep.
has pointed this out, but if you look at that Heritage Foundation wish list, a lot of it's like deeply libertarian stuff.
Sure.
It's all about getting rid of OSHA, hurting the workers, letting, companies do whatever they want, corporations do whatever they want, getting rid of like water safety. They want, it's just insane. But that's not what anyone's talking about when it comes to the conservative agenda. I mean, I think we should be talking about immigration and, LGBTQ rights, abortion. But I also wish more people would talk about, like, Justice Clarence Thomas just said he wants to get rid of OSHA.
Yeah.
I wish more people would talk about the Project 2025 stuff about that would affect, trying to deal with the forever chemicals problem, because there's been a Scientific American article on that. And it feels like we're not really talking about what a Trump term would mean, both for, just consumers and also workers. Do you think that's an issue that Democrats should maybe push on more, especially in light of the main topic we're going to be covering, which is the phony economic populism of J.D. Vance? Sorry if that was long-winded.
No, that was great. Absolutely. I mean, yes, the answer is yes. I think that it's crazy to me that they are kind of allowed to change the subject as much as they are away from all of this, because every issue that you mentioned is important. I would I think that it's like, certainly it's terrible that that the justices that Trump appointed essentially robbed women in many states of bodily autonomy during pregnancy. That's disgusting. But they're sort of on a strategic level, if you think about this, that I think that the stuff that you're talking about is actually where Republicans are the most vulnerable, because people kind of know that they're anti-abortion, and in fact, I think Trump has had in his sort of usual way, he has this kind of good animal instinct to sort of veer away from that a bit, right? Like he actually really did this, like, sort of in a way. I mean, I guess it was kind of funny, but like he did this sort of very Stalinist dictating of the RNC platform. Usually there'd be like a platform committee that would wrangle over all these different provisions and stuff, and he essentially said, now, here are some thoughts I had in the shower. This is the RNC platform, no discussion. And, everybody just kind of fell into line. And it really does read like that. Like, one of them is, we should have a giant missile dome over the entire country and all, made in America. And it's like all caps. And in that, right, he veers away from talking about abortion. He very pointedly does not include a national abortion ban, which I think he realizes would kill him in the election. He's like, "Oh, I did my job. It's up to the states." He veers away from saying that he wants to take away gay marriage. He just has like the only sort of bone to the social conservatives is like this very ambiguous phrase about believing in the sanctity of marriage, but which marriages is left open. But certainly, like, trans stuff, I could definitely imagine very easily a second Trump administration finding some ways to be really performatively cruel about that. But again, I think people kind of know that, whereas I think that they are
like
allowed...
for instance, real quick, not to interrupt you, but I just wanted to get this out there because I've been wanting to mention it. So I have this Scientific American article up. Project 2025 plan for Trump presidency has far-reaching threats to science. And buried halfway in it is the Project 2025 recommendations would also limit what is considered a pollutant or a hazardous chemical. In particular, they make the call to, quote unquote, revisit the designation of PFAS, which those are the forever chemicals that people were talking about. Like, this affects our drinking water, man. Like, and I don't hear people talking about that or the OSHA stuff. And I'm just frustrated that that's not, because that affects everyone. So I think you can even pull swing voters, or whatever.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the thing. And this is the kind of thing that we should actually be very confident that Trump is going to do. Right. So,
well, yeah, because it's deregulation. It's the deregulation agenda. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, because this is like, anything, like anything that's about like stuff that he might do now, that he's like promising to do now that he didn't do before, it's kind of anybody's guess how serious he is about it, this time around. But also, Trump was president for 4 years already. Everybody seems to have sort of forgotten that. And we know what he would do because he did it, right? And the first 4 years of Trump were this like nonstop orgy of deregulation, union busting, tax cuts for rich people. He did. I mean, like I remember in like December 2020 seeing this New York Times piece about how there were these Trump officials who were sort of taking the opportunity of their last weeks in office to weaken safety regulations for long distance trucking, right? So it's like, yeah, undermine workplace safety, undermine, environmental protection, make it easier for companies to poison the air and water. I mean, like that's the kind of stuff that it's like, that's just the given. That's the baseline.
Did you hear what just happened where I'm at in Florida? What happened back in April?
No, what happened?
Ron DeSantis got rid of any possibility of having like water breaks based on municipalities.
Oh yeah, I remember when this was first coming up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're prohibiting municipalities from like forcing companies to allow for water breaks and shading for our my lights just went out. Anyways, they're prohibiting municipalities from forcing corporations to allow water breaks, shading. It's like it's like contempt for workers that have risks associated with heat exposure. Just none of that matters. It's all just being ignored. They don't care about like the risks of heat exposure that some people have. No accommodations being made. And I mean, to me, this kind of thing is like, I mean, it's horrible. And if DeSantis is doing that, and if that's the agenda here in Florida, I mean, I think we know what the Republican agenda is nationwide.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, again, this is the kind of stuff that, I mean, this is just the baseline like this. Like, yeah, of course. I mean, this is what Trump would, this is like whatever else Trump does, right? Like whether or not he really makes a serious shot at fulfilling the promise on all of those mass printed signs that people were waving at the RNC saying mass deportation now, which, I think if, again, if he really made some sort of serious attempt at the kind of police operation it would take to round up and deport 15 million people, I think that would just be, I mean, that would be nightmarish, but he might or might not do that, right? Like I mean, it is important to remember, Republicans often say things to please their bases that they don't plan on doing either, right? But if he did make an effort to do that, that'd be awful. But like whether he does that or not, like yeah, stuff like that, undermining workplace safety, union rights, environmental protections, etc. Like yeah, that's the stuff that's like guaranteed,
And that's been the agenda for Republicans for decades now.
Yeah, of course, right? That's the as as the late Michael Brooks would put it, that's the core brand proposition.
So in 2022, in May of 2022, you wrote this piece for the Daily Beast entitled J.D. Vance's Unbelievably Phony Populism. I want to get into that, but first, can I get your reaction to just the whole RNC convention and the trying to appeal to the working class through that Sean O'Brien speech and then Vance, and it just seemed like it was a very circus-like atmosphere at the RNC. I mean, they even brought in Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, I mean, literally, Hulk Hogan ripped his shirt off to while screaming to reveal a Trump Vance shirt under it, which I've got to say was a deeply strange moment for me because
while saying they tried to kill our president, which who is the they there,
But yeah, apparently it wasn't a 20-year-old registered Republican who may not have had a political motive at all, might have just kind of been a mass shooter type. It wasn't that guy. It was they, right? And yeah, there was the same thing when Ben Carson was speaking. He said, oh, they tried to bankrupt him. They tried to impeach him. They tried to imprison him. They tried to shoot him. Uh, yeah, I didn't say this because I was watching on my computer in a public place with my headphones, but I really wanted to like scream at the computer, who is they? But yeah, no, I mean, like I am the right age that I can vividly remember watching Hulk Hogan on what was then called WWF. Uh and and watching him not only, fighting, whatever, Million Dollar Man or whoever, but like also I could remember a lot of WWF press conferences that were like exactly like what he did at the RNC. And yeah, that was one of those moments where it felt like a, Mandela affected into a different and much stranger timeline. But yeah, it was very circus like. But as you say, they were trying to do this economic populist pitch. So Sean O'Brien came to speak at the RNC, and notably
From the
O'Brien,
Teamsters Union, for people that are, yeah.
yeah, the head of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, and notably, Brother Sean did not actually endorse Trump or tell anybody to vote for Republicans. But I can also see how it was easy to miss that. He had apparently asked to speak at both conventions, so if the Democrats don't take his invitation, that really seems like an own goal. But in any case, the core of his speech I thought was good, right? I mean, he spent, like the sort of core part of the speech, he spent, talking about how, corporate America is screwing over workers, and, people need to, organize to fight back and all this stuff. And it was very eloquently said, and I liked it, right? But the problem is that he is trying, and whatever this says about sort of internal Teamster politics and, the segments of his membership, that he's sort of trying to represent here or whatever, like he's trying to sell this message to the RNC. And so he was kind of doing the equivalent of, when I give my dog a pill and I have to stick it in a gob of peanut butter, right? It's like, okay, what can I surround this with to make it more palatable to my audience? And man, there's a lot of peanut butter on that pill, right? It's like, oh, the left didn't want me to be here. The JD Vance is great. He really cares about workers. Josh Hawley did like 2.5 things that I like that, I'm going to bend over backwards to praise him for, even though like he's actually like way worse on most economic issues than like Chuck Schumer is. Never mind an actually left politician. A lot of that was a little silly, and I also think that, even if, there's this kind of there kind of isn't an amount of peanut butter that's going to get the dog to swallow the pill here. And then really like the Sean O'Brien pitch is, oh, you guys should like support organized labor, which they're not going to do. But the
Yeah, it felt like there were points during that speech where they were cutting back to Trump, and it just looked like Trump was like, why did we invite him here? I can't say that I know that for sure. But
yeah, well, look, I mean, Trump
he attacked the United Auto Workers.
Yeah, he did in his speech.
Trump did.
They should fire their president, which is the other union Sean, right? Sean Fain, which is insane because the UAW has actually been doing really well under his leadership. So it's like, yeah, good luck with that, man. You're gonna get the UAW rank and file to vote out Sean Fain while he's actually been, organizing previously non-union plants and, doing the successful stand-up strike and all that stuff. You're going to get them to vote now because he didn't endorse you, right? Like, come on. But But yeah, I mean, look, Trump as president filled the National Labor Relations Board with strikebreakers. They like if you go back and look at the NLRB rulings under Trump, I mean, it's like all crazily anti-labor. Like, you know, uh, Barack Obama, I'm sure anybody who's remembers previous conversations you and I have had on the show will know is very, very, very far from somebody I'm a fan of. But like there were a bunch of Obama NLRB rulings that were overturned by the Trump NLRB because they were like too friendly to union organizing. It was bad, right? So obviously they're not going to do that. But then, like, I think what you saw with, like, I don't know, the way I thought about the RNC is there were basically two tracks. One was the Haley Scalise track. So Nikki Haley, in her speech, basically made the neocon case for Trump. She said, "Hey, remember when Trump tore up the Iran deal and assassinated Soleimani, and did everything that Netanyahu wanted? Wasn't all that wonderful? Well, we can have that again." And Steve Scalise sort of did the domestic version of that. He reminded everybody of the Trump tax cuts. So the Haley Scalise track is, let's just make a case for Trump as a normal Republican. And then what I was thinking of is like the Carlson Vance track is basically what Tucker Carlson did in his speech and Vance really did in his speech, which is let's make a case for Trump is this like populist tribune of like the suffering of ordinary people in the heartland. But one thing you'll notice about both of those speeches, Tucker Carlson and JD Vance, is that like there's no policy in any of them. That like neither of them like said, therefore, this is the thing that Trump is going to do that's like a substantive reform to deal with any of these problems. It was more just like, hey, you know how the bipartisan elites are screwing you over? Well, Trump's your guy. And, it's just kind of empty because like JD Vance is like, there was a point where if you were listening to the JD Vance speech at the RNC, you literally, I think, wouldn't know that either Joe Biden or Donald Trump had ever been president. Like he was just like neither of their records in office really came up. He was sort of like when he was attacking Biden, he was attacking things that Biden did as a senator. And those are accurate attacks, right? He said Biden supported NAFTA, Biden supported the war in Iraq. True, right? But also, like, again, both of these guys were actually president. Like, what, it's like, yeah. As Nikki Haley noted the night before, Trump was way more of an Iran hawk than, either his predecessor or his successor. So JD Vance is kind of coasting on the stolen valor of retroactively opposing the Iraq war 20 years before he was elected to office. Like, not that he was like going to anti-war protests 20 years ago, but like, retroactively now opposing it, while at the same time, it's like, look, does he have a problem with Trump's policies about Iran, which could very well have gotten us into an all-out war with Iran and might very well get us into an all-out war with Iran if he's reelected? Because let me tell you, that would actually be way worse than the Iraq war if it happened.
No, I agree. And you mentioned O'Brien mentioning Josh Hawley, and I wanted to use Senator Hawley as an example of sometimes people like Hawley can say something that may sound, oh yeah, I as a leftist, I agree with that. That sounds crazy. Sure. But for instance, when he was pushing the Copyright Clause Restoration Act, I actually do think it's ridiculous that you can extend copyright like 95 years. Come on. Gone with the Wind should be in the public domain at this point, yes, right? Yes. But that bill would have only affected entities with market caps exceeding 150 billion, which means for practical purposes, it's only intended to punish the Walt Disney Company. So it's not really about truly changing the copyright laws,
Which is kind of funny because in a way that's like, this is like the, this is like the stuff you expect from Democrats, that they roll out something that sounds good and then there are like 100 caveats at the end of it. It's like, oh, never mind, right? It's like, oh yeah, we're going to forgive student debt for people who have operated small businesses and minority communities for at least 3 years and, have one brown eye and one green eye. And, like, it's like, okay, never mind. Right. Like, it's very much like that. But it's like, yeah, look, Josh Hawley has a few good votes in the Senate. But like to make this concrete, the AFL-CIO puts out legislative scorecards where they give politicians, percentages of like how many sort of pro-labor votes they did, like how many times they voted on the right side of issues affecting labor. And Josh Hawley's AFL-CIO legislative scorecard is 11%, which granted makes him Eugene Debs compared to most of the rest of his caucus, but like it's 11%. Like that is like pretty miserable.
Vance
And
didn't get a good scorecard either, did he?
Vance is actually 0%. So Vance is doing worse than Howley is.
Vance is
Grant,
another one, by the way, not to
yeah,
interrupt you, but
yeah, yeah.
I looked at the real safety bill and I was like, oh, that's good that he's working with Sherrod Brown or other Democrats to deal with real safety in light of East Palestine, Ohio, and what happened there. But then I look into it more, and Jacobin has a whole article about this by Julia Rock entitled "J.D. Vance has weakened his real safety bill at lobbyist requests." So Republican Senator J.D. Vance quietly amended his real safety bill to allow the same unsafe tank cars that leaked chemicals in East Palestine, Ohio, to continue circulating through U.S. cities until as late as 2028, just as real and chemical lobbies asked. So even though it seemed like he was doing something good at first, then he weakens the bill.
Also, by the way, like, why is Trump's record on rail safety as president like not part of this discussion, right?
Yeah, well, that's the elephant in the room. I should have mentioned.
Like, but yeah, exactly. Like even the stuff that's this good, right? Like I always talking about rail safety is like doing some work on that. Then you look at the details and it's kind of like, yeah, never mind. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's in general the Vance stuff, like, you know, granted, Vance's 0% is just for 2023 because that's the only full year that he's been in the Senate, right? Maybe he could get that up to 11% over the course of a few years, but it's also, I think it's also meaningful that it's 0% for 2023, and like yeah, people like Vance and Howley have mastered the art of sounding like populists when they talk about economic issues, but then you really start digging into the details and it's just ridiculous. Like even Josh Hawley with his a few good votes, right, which is what you can honestly say about this. Um, that he voted against stopping the rail strike. There are a few good votes, but like but look, you know what? He doesn't support the PRO Act, which would
And neither does Vance. And Vance has given reasons for that I'm not convinced by. But go on.
yeah, totally. Yeah, I don't know if anybody's pressed Howley about this. You mentioned Sohrab Ahmari earlier, and when Sohrab was on my show, uh, he put out this book on Tyranny Inc. about private power, and he was gonna.
Which I thought was a good book.
Sure, it is a good book, but he was going to do an event about it that was going to include Marco Rubio, and so I asked him when I was interviewing, I was like, and I don't know if he did or not. He told me like Sorab actually told me on air that he would ask this, but I was like, what? You ask Marco tomorrow why he doesn't support the PRO Act, right? If he means any of this, because like this is a really minimal standard. I mean, so what the PRO Act would basically do, most of it is just reversing some of the most egregiously anti-union parts of Taft-Hartley. Um, the existing structure of American labor law, as I'm sure most people who are listening to this know, but I mean, just really quickly, is like just crazily tilted against against workers trying to organize unions, go on strike, all that stuff. And when I say that, I don't just mean like sort of compared to like, my wish list as a bright-eyed socialist. I mean compared to like Canada, right? Like just compared to like normal Western democracies, US labor law graded on that curve is like is tilted crazily against workers trying to organize unions and go on strike and all that. I mean, you can have these captive audience meetings where workers are forced to go on, like during their working hours are required to go to meetings to be barraged with anti-union propaganda, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? I'm sure people know all this stuff, but like it's it's like the PRO Act is like just this very basic initiative to like reverse some of the worst, most anti-worker part of existing American labor law. And the fact that Howley and Vance and Rubio, like these people won't even support that, to me says everything. It's such a minimal standard. And like, yeah, I saw that thing where JD Vance was giving his reasons for not supporting it.
I have it pulled up right here. I was going to ask you
Yeah,
directly about it.
yeah,
So Vance, this Sarab again was the one to interview him about this. So
yeah.
Vance says that he supports a regime of sectoral bargaining like the ones that prevail in continental Europe, rather than shop by shop organizing bequeathed by the New Deal. He also noted that, as it is, the existing mainstream labor movement is irreconcilably hostile to Republicans and that more trust building is needed before a comprehensive rapprochement can take place. And that second part alone just says to me, well, this is just excuse making for why you're not. Like, if you want the Republicans to be more labor, they have to give something to labor, in order to get labor on their side. But they don't actually want to do that anyways. So to me, that's
Yeah.
just excuse making. But go on.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the second part really gives away the game. I mean, it's just like, well, they don't, they don't support us, so,
And I'd say the same thing as some Democrats, like.
yeah, of course, right? It's like, no, look, yeah. I mean, the second part is just like, well, they don't like us for some reason, so we're not going to make it easier for them to organize.
I couldn't imagine why.
Yeah, exactly. And then like, yeah, the first part, I think
The
also
sectoral bargaining stuff, yeah.
doesn't deserve to be taken seriously because you know, I think it fits into a larger pattern with Vance. And this is a big part of what I was writing about in that 2022 article for the Daily Beast, which is that Vance in particular, it's like his party trick kind of is that he has really mastered the ability to come up with populist sounding ways to concretely come down on the same side as the Wall Street Journal editorial board. So my favorite example of this is when Vance was on Tucker Carlson's old show on Fox. He said that Medicare for all would be a giveaway to the professional class because like the government would essentially be paying doctors. So like that this is like the perfect example of a JD Vance argument, right? Like it's sort of you start to dig into it at all, it's kind of nonsensical. It's like, oh yeah, weird then that the AMA doesn't support Medicare for all, right? But I wonder why not, right? But like in fact, in fact, doctor salaries would probably go down a bit, if we had Medicare for all, which, I'm fine with. I think you can, they're unusually high, by standards of comparable nations. And, if we had, like doctors could be making a bit less money and it would still be a very desirable career. And, and also if you paired it with, if you paired it with free college, it would also be less of a big deal. But it's silly, right? It's like, oh, that's why you don't support Medicare for all because you're just not willing to like give anything to doctors because that's a middle class profession. Come on, man. Or there was another one where he described universal free daycare as class war against ordinary people on the grounds that there's like polling where people who didn't have college degrees were more likely than people who did have college degrees to say that the arrangement they would prefer most is like one parent staying home with the kids while the other one works. Although again, not even that dramatically, and I think not even an absolute majority. I think it was like 44% of non-college people versus 35% of college graduates said that that was their preferred arrangement. And of course, again, 10 seconds of thought should tell you that if the state is paying for daycare, that doesn't actually mean you have to take it. Right? It just gives you more options. Right? Nobody's gonna come to your door and be like, oh, why hasn't your child reported to daycare? That's they're you're not allowed to stay home with them. But like it's an excuse. Again, he's coming up with a populist sounding reason to oppose giving people free daycare. And this is just the same thing, right? That he's doing for the PRO Act, like with that first reason that he's saying that he's like in this case, he's like, oh, I don't like the PRO Act because I want to go even further. It's like, no, you don't, right? Like, I see no reason to believe that you're serious about that. If like a bunch of Democrats were out there pushing, sectoral bargaining, I don't believe for a second that, JD Vance would be on their side. And the reason I don't believe that is if he was, right, if he wanted to go even further, right, why wouldn't he support this, right? Like why wouldn't he because look, that's not normally how JD Vance decides his votes, that it's like, oh, if it's less than the full thing that I want, I'm not going to support it, right? Like he supports all kinds of things that he thinks should go further, right? Every senator does. It's like, yeah, if he supported that, he would obviously vote for this as a step in that direction, especially because I also think, I guess my last thought about this is just I'm a little suspicious of if you do to believe for the sake of argument you're serious about this. I kind of think any version of sectoral bargaining that JD Vance would support would likely suck. Because like when you talk about like sectoral bargaining in Nordic countries, for example, what that's based on you having these incredibly strong industrial unions, that are doing the bargaining, right? Like, so I want to know like who would be the representatives of the workers' interests if he actually got this, and if it, in this bargaining process, and if it's unions, then like, none of this I think makes that much sense. But I think even sort of trying to sort out the mechanics misses the point, right? The point is that he wants to, he doesn't actually want to do anything that would, upset Peter Thiel in policy terms, but at the same time, he wants to do his populist shtick, even though anybody whose memory extends all the way back to 2016 knows how strange it is that he sounds like this now.
Yeah, because he was a never Trumper Romneyite.
Yeah, hillbilly elegy, right? That's how he became famous.
Which is an interesting book because liberals are the ones that made him famous for that. And it also could have easily been called Pull Yourself Up by the Bootstraps, You Drug Addicts. Because it's very condescending towards the people he calls brothers and sisters and mamas. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. That's the whole point of the book. I mean, he's basically doing Bill Cosby for poor white people, pull your pants up. And the entire point of that book is finger wagging, the hillbillies for their culture of poverty. And he talks, he approvingly cites Charles Murray in that book, where he's like, oh, see what Charles Murray was saying about the inner city culture of poverty could just as easily have been written, about, these people that I grew up around or sort of grew up around, in Kentucky. And he says that he talks about young men who don't want to work in that book. That's a phrase he uses. Too many young men lose hard work. He says that the cultural problem goes much deeper than macroeconomic policy, right? So it's like, yeah, that's the original JD Vance, is the like he's just being the equivalent of the black conservative who's trotted out to to go on the Fox shows to to talk about inner city culture of poverty stuff. That he's being the rural poor white people version of that guy. And at the time, as you say, he was a very Romney-ish, never Trumper. And in fact, I mean, infamously, JD Vance once, I mean, God, he went further than I would, right? He said that Trump was America, well, I think he hedged it a little bit, right? But he said that he could be
He could
America's
be the
Hitler.
American Hitler, yeah.
Yeah, which is, yeah, that's the like it is actually objectively amazing how little time separated him saying that from him being Trump's running mate.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a huge transformation in how Vance talks. I mean, and like I said, the watering down of that real safety bill, I don't I don't know every policy that Vance has pushed. I think the one that, if I were to give him any light praise, I think he did co-sponsor a piece of legislation to cap insulin costs, much to the chagrin of other Republicans. I think it was about capping it at $35 on the commercial
Yeah,
market. But
yeah, I remember this. So I think God, I'm trying to remember. So I know
see, but then with the real safety bill, I wonder if there was some chicanery with that too. I don't know though.
yeah. So this is so just to make sure. So this is also two. No, hold on, because Vance was elected in 2022, right? I believe so. Right. I think yeah. So he was elected to the Senate in 2022 because in spring 2022 there was there was a vote on the insulin price cap, but that was before he was in. But it's possible that since he was elected, he's
He's
done.
served since 2023, so
Yeah, exactly. Right. So he was elected, came in the 2022 election. Yeah, so it is notable, by the way, right? I mean, I remember because I wrote about that at the time, that the certainly in the House vote on capping insulin at $35 a month, the like you know a bunch of the most maggy, like sort of militant thorn in the side of whoever the speaker is at the time, kind of Republican Congress people all voted against it, right? So Marjorie Taylor Greene, Madison Cawthorn, Lauren Boebert, Paul Gosar, Louis Gohmert, Matt Gaetz, right? Nay, 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 right? And so I thought that was incredibly revealing. But yeah, if when Vance came in 2023, he
no, it was.
was
I looked it up on Axios. He said in 2022 that he supports
oh I see.
negotiating drug prices, but
Okay.
this is before he was in office. So even that,
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah. Yeah, who knows, right? Yeah. No, totally. And yeah, it's like, look, I wouldn't be surprised if even if he managed to go all of 2023 without casting a single pro-labor vote, according to the AFL-CIO, I wouldn't be surprised if like between 2023 and the months so far of 2024, like probably you can find like a few decent votes, right, from somebody like Vance. Like I would actually be a little surprised if there were zero, but it's
well, he
not.
does have to work with people like Sherrod Brown on some level
Yeah,
because they're
yeah,
both
yeah,
in
yeah,
Ohio, Rust Belt. Yeah.
yeah, right. So I'm sure he's like I'm sure he has a few, but like like the interesting question to me is what's the standard of comparison that people are using to judge him. And it seems to me, right, that it's like it's not just that he's like less of an economic populist than Sherrod Brown. It's that again, I'm pretty sure he's like objectively much less of a populist than these like awful ghoulish corporate Democrats, like your your Chuck Schumer types, right? That like like I'm sure by any reasonable metric, um, that JD Vance is like much worse on workers' rights, government social programs, et cetera, than like, to go to the other house, Nancy Pelosi, right? Never mind, like the squad or whoever, right? Like, and so, and I think this is just a really important point to hit, because I think a lot of people who actually pay a decent amount of attention to the news and politics have this vague impression that people like Howley, or especially Vance, is sort of at this point having been elevated to being like the most prominent spokesman of this wing of the Republican Party. They sort of have the impression that, like, well, of course, if they have left wing views, right? Of course he's going to be bad on LGBT stuff. Of course he's going to be bad on abortion and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But like, he's probably going to like agree with a lot of Bernie bro kind of views about economics. And I think that that's like a sort of very common kind of medium information voter sort of impression to have. And it's just complete bullshit.
Well, I think
Right.
you mentioned in the article that he's very clear on a number of issues, at least from in
Yeah.
2022 when he wrote, he's like, universities need to have their funding cut if they teach critical race theory. We need to ban abortion. But on issues like the opioid epidemic, he's like, well, how do we deal with it? And it's very vague how we deal with that. It's very vague, when he's talking about dealing with, any number of issues related to, the plight of working people. So,
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, look,
like the phrase working class will appear, the phrase, poverty rate will appear in his writings, but like on the issues page that you referenced in 2022. But, it's all very vague. But with abortion, it's not. He's crystal clear on certain issues, and they're not the ones involving the working class necessarily.
no, exactly. I mean, you know, he makes a big deal of mentioning the opioid crisis in that 2022 campaign website, but he doesn't say anything there about what he wants to do about it, right? He just kind of says like, "Oh, this is something I really care about," and Washington has failed us, blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, yeah, all true, but what do you want to do, right? And he doesn't spell it out at all. In fact, he had, after the success of Hillbilly Elegy, he actually started a nonprofit that was supposed to be devoted to exactly that issue, and it lasted for like a year, maybe 2 years, but it was like very very short lived, and it spent like 95% of its revenue on staff, and I think ended up transferring $0 to any kind of external charity. And I think former staffers have said they got the impression that the main function of the nonprofit was to get Vance's name out there, and sort of give him like a more of a presence back in Ohio, after he built up his national profile. So yeah, I mean, it's just empty. I mean, I guess at the RNC he said what he wanted to do about the opioid crisis, which, I'm paraphrasing loosely here, but I think like, um, you know, I think like, behead immigrants in the town square, right? I mean, that was like the gist of it. But of course, that wouldn't do anything about it, right? That's not actually, like, even in terms of the supply, like
That reminds me too. You have a lot of Republicans that are all like, "Let's go bomb Mexico," and then
yeah.
I mean, on the Eric Prince front, if you read that reporting that Ken Silverstein did about Eric Prince's off-leash chat group, there's people calling for like war with Iran, and these are like major sort of figures within the conservative movement. They're like, we need to do covert assassinations in Iran, and so we want war with Iran, war with Mexico, and then you have Trump talking about we need to hit China harder. And it's like, yet you have these people that are trying to argue that the Republican Party are the anti-war party, which is crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who's actually, yeah, I've kind of alternated for the last year and a half between periods of living in Southern California and periods of living in Northern Mexico, and I'm not in Mexico right this second, but I have been living in Mexico over the summer. Uh, Man, I want to say I really hope that they do not in fact bomb Mexico, but like, if you did, I mean, this is actually, I think this part was actually cut out of the MSNBC article for length, but like let's say you did, like you really went with the full program here. That because like there was a point during the RNC when one of the speakers said that they should formally classify the Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, and Trump apparently can be seen in the video feed leaning over to Vance and mouthing, "We should do it." And so it's like, okay, let's say they did that, and let's say, I don't know, whatever it is that you think that they would need to do to just like wipe the cartels off the face of the earth, they did. They bombed or perhaps invaded America's second biggest trading partner, and which is also like, if you want to know what a war with your immediate neighbor that you have close ties to looks like, Russia Ukraine is a nice example there. It's I think no fun for anybody, but yeah, like let's say you did that. Let's even assume, although this is not true, that this would like somehow mean that like the cartels just cease to exist. Um, okay. Well, look, now you've eliminated a source of the supply um, at pretty nightmarish cost, but let's say for the sake of argument you've done that. But I don't know, man. I mean, I'm just flashing to my college, Econ 101 class and the supply and demand curves and all that. Like it does seem to me that somebody else would pick up the slack about the supply, right? I mean, that this is indeed how economies tend to work as long as the demand is going strong, right? Like some enterprise and entrepreneur will step up with the supply, and it's just like that again, like the idea that there's even an issue to be solved about like why there's all this demand is just not on the radar, right, of any of these people. Like they just don't talk about that at all. It's just like, oh, there's fentanyl because like Mexicans are sneaking in through the border and I don't know, holding people down and forcing them to get high. Like I'm pretty, again, these are deaths of despair, and there's no program at all to do anything about the despair that I can tell, unless they're gonna provide jobs working for a deportation force.
Before we close out here, I guess the biggest issue for me is having watched the RNC and having looked at Vance's record and just Trump's record. I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, within the RNC alone, I think there was a lot of what I can only call schizophrenic rhetoric, because on
Yeah.
one end you have Sean O'Brien there, but then on the other end you have, you know, Trump attacking the audit workers. So, I mean, there's that where, they'll complain about military adventurism, and then they'll talk about wanting to bomb Iran, or hit China. And I'm like, well, you know, decide
Yeah,
which one you
right.
want. And not only that, but their actual records don't always match the rhetoric. So I just think people need to be real careful about this idea that, oh, well, they're saying things that sound populist. Well, yeah, but what's their record? And then why are they also saying things that are very anti-populist?
Yeah, right. I mean, like I thought that JD Vance's best line at the RNC was the thing about how our jobs were shipped overseas and our children were sent to war. It's like, yeah, true, true. But again, I mean, yeah, Trump was president for 4 years. He did negotiate some, renegotiate some trade deals, but the new versions were just not fundamentally that different, from the old versions. And in fact, over the course of Trump's time in office, the U.S. actually had a net loss in manufacturing jobs, and which is really like, just to make this personal for a second, right? My mom grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. That's where my grandparents lived until they died. We used to go there all the time to visit them, because we weren't that many hours away in Michigan. And, it's Youngstown in my experience is pretty dystopian, how it's gotten, and Donald Trump did a campaign stop in Youngstown in 2016 where he said, don't sell your house. I'm gonna bring the jobs back. Right. And spoiler, that didn't happen, right? Like, so that's just kind of hot air. And then, as far, yeah, they sent our, you know, yeah, sent our kids to war. It's like, yeah, uh-huh. And and you guys keep talking about how Biden is too soft on Iran. And which again, like we came very close to a war with Iran under Trump. At the
You
risk
mean
of
with the
sound.
Soleimani?
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, like Trump ended the détente with Iran that Obama had negotiated, and he assassinated Soleimani. And then then there was some tit for tat, violence after that. And honestly, I think that it's really the sort of cautiousness of the Iranian regime. It's like relative restraint and response. That's the only reason that didn't escalate, into an all-out war. Which is also, I've got to say, is the pattern that we just saw when Israel blew up their embassy. And yeah, I know. It's like, oh no, see, technically it wasn't an embassy, it was an adjoining Iranian building, that was next to the embassy, but like it doesn't count if it's, I'm sure everybody would be making these fine-grained distinctions if it was an American embassy. But Israel blew up their embassy, and their response was, okay, in 48 hours, we are going to send some of our slowest moving missiles and drones. Hint, hint, hint. Right? Like it was, again, I think the sort of established rules of the game, they have to respond a little bit, but I think it was about the most restrained response they possibly could have done. So like, but so far, I think in both cases, right, what's stopped all out war has been the fact that the Iranians don't want one. Right. Like if, and I think it's entirely possible that if, as Republicans are certainly suggesting right now, they want a more aggressive policy towards Iran, it's entirely possible we will get a war with Iran. And also, by the way, you mentioned China. Like there is a direct parallel here. Like a lot of Republicans, well, I don't know. A significant faction of Republicans are critical of the war in Ukraine. That's true. Uh, they're very divided on it. JD Vance, we didn't cover this, has been like actually hedged his bets more on that than a lot of people realize, right? Like he's sort of taken a very carefully triangulated line about Ukraine funding, but um, but look, there's an exact parallel, right? Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, and a lot of the most MAGA-y Republicans are also the ones most aggressive about how the U.S. should be pumping more aid and saber rattling more about Chinese aggression toward Taiwan. And that one is like unimaginable, right? Like so. I mean, both of those. I mean, Iran, if it happened, like if we finally completed Bush's grisly tic-tac-toe of Afghanistan and Iraq, with Iran in the middle. Like the Taliban never controlled all of Afghanistan. They never exerted anything like full control over the entire country. By the time we invaded Iraq, they had never been allowed to rebuild from the first Gulf War. They'd been under crippling sanctions and had their air defenses bombed for 12 years. Iran is a real country with a real army. Like that would be way worse than those other wars. And like China, that's like unimaginable. I mean, the People's Liberation Army in China is the largest armed force on the planet, and I believe actually also the largest single employer on the planet. And so even if a war with China miraculously stayed conventional, like the largest and second largest army on the planet, coming into direct conflict, with all of those conventional weapons that we've developed since the last, war between major powers ended in 1945. Is just utterly nightmarish. And again, I'm not saying either of these things would happen if Trump, Vance, or win the election. Could be that neither of them happen, could be that some version of one of them happens, even if the Democrats win. But it's just really striking that they want to do this populist anti-war thing when it comes to the wars that are far enough in the past that it's safe to say this about, but they also want to hit the Democrats for being insufficiently hawkish on these conflicts that if they escalated into all-out wars would just be like inconceivably awful.
There's just one more thing I wanted to ask you about. I know I've kept you a little bit over,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I don't want to sound like I'm not being a big defender of
sure,
Democrats or Biden here,
sure,
but I and I don't think Democrats have pointed this out enough, but I think there has been some gains made for labor
totally.
since Biden got into office. And I also appreciate, and this hasn't been covered much, but the FBI under Biden has been doing antitrust investigations into the housing market, focusing on RealPage's price setting software, which was basically
Yep.
artificially jacking up rent prices. And it was under Biden that the FBI did that. I do think I guess what I'm saying is that I know some on my left are
Sure.
will take this like defending Biden. It's not an uber defense of Biden, but there's been some good things that have been done
Yeah.
since
Yeah.
Biden got into office. And especially with the antitrust stuff and some of the labor stuff, I think there's
Yep.
been some movement in the right direction. Do you think Democrats should maybe talk about that more and message about that more?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, I think to the extent that they can make the election about that, then they're better off, right? Because yeah, I think that this is that talking about unions, talking about, even like I mean, look, I'm not, uh, I'm not, I don't want to exaggerate here, right? Because we're sort of talking about sort of very, conventional sort of liberal trust busting stuff. But I think some of the FTC stuff has been good. I think, I think there are definitely contrasts to be drawn there. And I also think that one interesting point to make here is that during the last weeks that he was clinging to the nomination, Biden actually did make some moves to sort of throw big bones, at least in terms of promises, to his left flank. Right? He said, you know,
And
he
this
said,
isn't like praising him on Gaza or anything like
"Oh
that. We're
my
not
God,
saying
no,
that. Yeah.
no,
But go on.
I mean, I'm literally, yeah, I'm recording an episode of my show tonight. That's it's going to be we're going to be interviewing the director of this Al Jazeera documentary, The Night Won't End, Biden's War in Gaza. And the title of the episode is It's Good That Biden Dropped Out, but he should be on trial at The Hague. I think, I think if we're just going to like evaluate Joe Biden morally as a human being, I think that, I think he's totally indefensible, right? But I think just like as an observation about what has happened in American politics, it is actually true that he has, I
I mean,
mean,
I mentioned the thing with the rental market. This is just from
yeah,
July 12th, 2024. Justice Department preparing rental market collusion lawsuit. This is like literally only a few weeks ago, and I do think there needs to be some praise for that, especially with the
sure,
price of housing. Yeah.
sure. I mean, look, and yeah, he did. Biden again did like throw these rhetorical, more than rhetorical. He threw some policy promise bones. You can argue about how serious he was about them to his left flank in his final weeks as a candidate. So he said, he started talking about wiping out medical debt. He endorsed sort of sweeping reforms to the Supreme Court of a kind that that he's never seemed willing to contemplate before. On the housing point, he announced this plan for a rate like a 5% rental rate hike that tax breaks for major landlords would be contingent on them holding it down to that, so you could do it on a federal level. very tellingly as far as his problems as a, you know, as a communicator, as his brain was, rapidly leaking out of his ears. He fumbled the presentation of that last one when he announced at the NAACP convention. He meant to say 5% cap, and he said he was going to cap rent increases at $55, which I still think, the president said it, we should hold him to it. But, but yeah, look, these are baby steps in the right direction. And so I think the question now about, I assume Kamala Harris, I've seen in today's news, it looks like most of the other obvious candidates have just gone ahead and endorsed her. So it is technically an open convention because there's no
I was arguing with people about that yesterday because it seemed like there were, I was worried at first. It seemed like, Clinton was endorsing Harris and then Obama was saying there's going to be an open convention. He wasn't endorsing, and I was like, oh, is there going to be unity leading up to the DNC? But it does seem like now people are coalescing.
It does seem like there is going to be, yeah, which, look, I don't necessarily love. I think that Harris in some ways, I think she has, I think she has at least some chance of winning. And, Biden was like completely toast, right? But like, I think she's like a relatively weak candidate. I don't know if she would have won if they'd had a real primary. But yeah, it does look like everybody's consolidating behind her. Whitmer and all the obvious people who'd be alternative candidates have already endorsed her. So it looks like it's going to be her. And, I could do, look, if anybody wants to know what my like critique of Kamala Harris is, go back and read all the stuff that I wrote about the 2020 primaries. But like, if we're just kind of like wish casting here, I think that I don't expect her to do any of this, but like there is a way that Kamala Harris could really run on a contrast between this absurdly vacuous fake populism from Trump and Vance and like an actual program of meaningfully helping working class people. Like as hard as this is to remember, once upon a time she was a Senate co-sponsor of Medicare for All. She could take that up again, which by the way, I'd argue that the Biden stuff about getting rid of medical debt is kind of incoherent without Medicare for All, because like either this is a commodity or it's not. And if it is, the idea that it's going to be so cheap that nobody ever goes into debt over it, I think is just not, reality. I don't see how that could work. So like it's going forward, if it's still a commodity, people are going to still get into debt over it. Right. So yeah, she could, go back to Medicare for All, which by the time the 2020 election happened, she was sort of trying to triangulate on that in a bizarre way. Right. But like she was originally a Senate co-sponsor. She could go back to that. She could certainly break from Biden on Gaza. That's, because she's not nearly as associated with that as Biden is, and there's certainly like plenty of room for her to come out and she could coat it with as much peanut butter as she wanted about how much she loves and respects Biden, but say I respectfully disagree about this, right? Basically do all the stuff that Bernie always says. She could she could like really come out swinging on, the need to rebuild the labor movement. Again, theoretically, her administration supports the PRO Act, even though they haven't, they've certainly put it on the backest of back burners, right? That like she could actually run this left populist campaign if she wanted to. And again, I don't expect her to, but if she did, I actually think that would be her best shot at sort of taking away the fire from the Trump.
That's where I'm at as well. I made a joke to someone recently. I'm like, someone needs to get Aaron Magruder from the Boondocks out of hiding. He helped her get elected to her AG role, to Attorney General. He literally, he was very involved in her, like helping her get elected. And
Yeah.
I'm like, someone needs to get Erin Magruder to talk to her.
Yeah. Uh, well, this is a little trollish, but I also do think it's correct. I just want to say, now that it looks like she's going to be the nominee, that VP slot is open. And if she wanted to go the lane I'm suggesting, and she wanted to show that she was really serious about it,
Who do you want to be VP
got it.
pick?
Gotta say, there's a certain senator from Vermont, who you'd totally kill any suspicion that Biden was shoved out because of ageism.
You're on the Bernie train all the way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, come on. What would prove it more than that?
What do you think, out of curiosity, about some of the other names getting floated now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that if we're gonna do like, if she's not gonna do anything like what I'm suggesting, if she's just gonna sort of run a very conventional, like sort of bathwater Democratic campaign, yeah, look, I mean, I think probably the conventional wisdom is right that somebody like Gretchen Whitmer might make sense, as like a sort of popular swing state governor with some meaningful political skills.
Do you think
You know,
Bashir is too like regional, or
Bashir might work. I mean, look, uh, yeah, uh, you know, I don't know. I saw a clip of him today. He seems okay. I mean, like I guess I guess I did laugh earlier when I saw Alice from Queens calling him Hillbilly Beto O'Rourke, but
oof?
but uh, but yeah, he's probably okay. I could see the sense in that, right? Like sort of countering the Vance pick, Uh, but um, but like, look, I'm sure that in the overwhelmingly likely timeline where, Kamala doesn't read my articles in Jacobin, and which, though, God knows, I could imagine her dad forwarding her some, right? But, you know, she doesn't do that. And so she just runs like a very conventional Democrat kind of campaign. Like, I'm sure she can find somebody who's a basically, I'm sure she can find one of these like governors who would have been a better candidate at the top of the ticket than she'll be, and make them the VP, and God knows, maybe she'll manage to slide in under the door.
I mean, I don't know what to expect. I just hope that I think Democrats should focus on labor. That doesn't mean they have to be, have exactly one-to-one our views on things. But it just seems like that seems like where the wind is blowing for the public, in my view, at least.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think so, right? Like, I think that I think that this sort of JD Vancey, you know, populism is incredibly fake and con artisty.
I mean, it's
But I
10
think
years old at this point. I mean, not,
that
I
not
mean, it was
even.
around before that, but
Yeah, yeah.
it's like on the
Yeah, no,
national
no, no,
stage, this whole
I see what you're
Trump,
saying.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Right. It's like, look, I think the populism is fake, but I think it taps into real pain, right? I mean, like,
Right.
the stuff that they're talking about is very real. And I think Biden was able to coast in 2020. It helped that he didn't have to campaign because of COVID. He was able to coast in on 2020 on the basis of everything's a huge mess and I'm gonna like get us back to normal. And then I think people have kind of had 4 years to not be impressed by the getting back to normal. And again, I think that all this stuff about, deindustrialization and the opioid crisis and the,
Do you think
housing
just
crisis. I mean, it's all real, right? So
right,
it's
right?
like there's a reason why this incredibly thin con artistish pitch might actually work. So yeah,
I
if
I
they
think I think
correctly
the
countered it, that could work.
I think the bottom line, and I'll let you go after this, is you know, Democrats have been saying for the past 10 years, we have to save democracy. We have to save democracy. Trump is a fascist. And it's not, I do think there are ramifications for our democracy if if Trump gets a second term. But I think in addition to talking about those things, we also need a positive vision and an economic vision that gives people hope and inspires them to vote. And I think that's where democratic messaging needs to go right now.
Yeah. Well,
Because the people, the fence sitters right now that exist, and I do think there are fence sitters. I know a few.
yeah.
I think, you need to provide them a message that is more than just Trump is bad. Well, what's our vision?
Yeah. Look,
We've been banging that drum probably for 10 years too, though.
Professor Emeritus Donald Harris, if you're listening to this episode, just please pass on the gist of this to your daughter.
Well, hey, thank you so much, Ben Burgis, for coming on Parallax Views. How can my listeners keep up with your work? You're on Twitter, right? Or X?
I am on Twitter at my name, and Jacobin GTAA.
Well, that does it for this edition of Parallax Views. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Ben Burgis, and as always, that you'll support me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. Given that I already gave you the spiel at the beginning of this episode, I won't do it again. Just saying, patreon.com/parallaxviews. And with that being said, until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.